Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this conversation on generations. Today we're going to discuss a very fascinating topic. While we wait for more people to join in, what we're going to do today is a conversation in which we'll examine how the demographics of the world is changing. And in that context, as a new generation takes the spotlight, we look into the implications for all of us in business, marketers, brands. What do we make of it? And how should we plan for this transition? With that, let me just talk about my fellow speakers today. So, joining me in this interesting conversation are two very astute minds. We have Sudip Mitra, who's the Senior Vice President. He heads the corporate strategy and business development lines for Aditya Birla Group. And also with me, my colleague Ashwini, who heads
Hi,
two
everyone.
service lines for Ipsos India. One is qualitative and the other relates to social data insights. So we're going to have this conversation in the context, like I said, of the big demographic transitions that are unfolding, not just at an India level, but across the world. So let's just take a quick look at what this is, and then let's talk a little bit about generations. So start with at Ipsos, we often say that demographics is politics, and the recent events in Bangladesh is again underlining this sort of a fact. What we are seeing right now is a transition in which what you see on this graph is the median age of the population. So that's the halfway mark of the age of population. And you see, for the longest time, the world population had been in their 20s, and in the recent decades, it has rapidly transitioned into the 30s and is headed towards the 40s. In fact, for the first time in a very long time, we are headed for a population decline. And that is something that everyone realizes is going to have a huge impact, not just in terms of the outcomes for our species, but also in terms of direct economic impact. Now, what is happening, however, is that the pace of this change is different in different countries. The age pyramid is different and it's transitioning differently. So some countries are aging much faster than the others. South Korea, Italy, you will see that they will soon, the median age will hit 50s. And countries like India and the United States would have transitioned from the 30s moving towards 40s and so on. In fact, by the turn of the century, it'll be only countries in Africa which will have like median ages of 20s. So, in this sort of significant transition, what we also realize is there is an implication for all of us. If we look at India, as the most populous nation, this is an interesting phase for India, because what's going to happen is every fifth young person in the world will be an Indian, and that in itself is a mind-blowing fact. But it makes India look a lot more youthful than India actually is, because every fifth Indian will also be an elderly person, and this has obvious impact, obvious call outs for development. It has obvious call outs for how we plan for a future and so on. Now, if you think about these two bookends of the population, on one hand, we have Gen Z, the youth, and the other hand, we have the boomers, the seniors. And if we look at these two ends of the sort of spectrum, we realize that this is not just a transition in a demographic sense, but it has huge implications in terms of how we as businesses plan ahead. The current core consumer group, the millennials, uh, are are still in the spotlight, there is a group which is slowly receding from the spotlight. And that is the group to which I think all of us on this panel belong, which is Gen X. And look at the age group. We're talking about people who have just moved out of the conventional TG of most of our clients, but haven't as yet reached that critical threshold of being a seniors. This is an interesting group, and this is also a group that we need to focus on. So in our conversation today, we're going to be talking about both Gen Z, which is coming into spotlight, and in fact, not a week passes by when we don't get a brief asking us to investigate some aspect or the other about Gen Z. But we'll also focus a little bit, we'll chat a little bit about our own generation, which is Gen X, and what is to be made of this generation. Now, before we go ahead, there are some caveats in how we think about generations and how we sort of process generational analysis. The reality is that context matters, right? When we call out these huge labels, Gen Z, Gen X, boomers, and so on, it is assumed almost like people of a certain age group will have a similar mindset irrespective of the context. And we all know that's not going to be true. The context matters. And if the contextual realities converge, then the experience and the influence will also converge. So that's one thing to remember, that a generational difference does not mean that the context just doesn't matter. At the same time, uh, there is another reality that often when we are talking about, Gen Z, for example, we often confuse age group realities with what is perhaps not a generational realities. We have heard, not just over the decades, but over the millennia, people talking in a certain way about young people. So some of the characteristics of Gen Z are actually characteristics of young people, and we have to monitor and see how it evolves as they go into their middle years and so on. The last, but the most important caveat is that when we use labels of the kind of Gen Z and boomers and so on, there is an implication that these are well understood terms. What we in Ipsos have found is that the terms aren't often that much of a currency beyond a few sort of narrow pockets. So, I mean, in United States, we've found that there is a reasonable amount of understanding of generations and which generation one belongs to. But at the same time, in countries like India, there is a much lesser understanding of generational classification and even identification with generation among the general population. So, keeping all these caveats in mind, let's start our conversation by focusing on the younger people, the Gen Z, who is now moving into the spotlight. And I'd like to start by talking a little bit about what we discussed a little earlier, which is, there is a whole lot of stereotypes around generations, uh, which we often encounter, and maybe even myths. Ashwini, you've studied this group a lot. What has been your observation?
Yeah. So, Geeta, you're absolutely right when you say that there are a lot of, stereotypes and myths about this segment. And one of the most popular myths is that, Gen Z is this happy-go-lucky sort of a generation who's able to navigate the complexities of life really well. But what we found is that Gen Z is one of the most stressed generations. They are anxious. And a lot of the cause of this anxiousness and stress is on themselves because, what they end up doing is that there's a lot of comparison which happens with people around them,
Mm,
which
mm,
puts a lot of stress on them. And whatever they're doing is never really enough. They are actually measuring their life and their success by the number of likes, by the number of shares, by the number of followers that they have, and which is one of the reasons why they're always feeling that they are falling behind others. Now, I think, but the interesting point over here is, and very different from the other generations, is that they're aware that they're stressed and anxious, and they're willing to seek help for that. So this is like one big point of difference versus other generations that we've seen. Yeah, and of course, I mean, beyond being stressed, we've also found that they're lonely, right? And this is again a surprise because, for people who have so many connections on social media, to be lonely is something which is news. But this is also possibly happening because of the
Mm.
blurring of boundaries between their
Yeah.
virtual life and their real life. So they're not
Mm.
able to make this, clear distinction between the two. Now, in fact, this blurring of lines is impacting their relationships and, most importantly, their friendships in a big way. And we've seen that the pandemic has taken a toll on their friendships and it's impacted them, much more than the other generations.
Mm.
So, on one hand, most of their relationships are online. They want to form relationships in the offline world and meet and connect with people more often, but they really struggle to form these relationships, right?
Mm.
And this is also possibly a cause of stress to them, and it sort of links to what we saw earlier about them being stressed and being lonely.
Mm.
Now, look at your own possibly
Mm.
families, and I know it happens often to me that I struggle to form a connection with my nieces and nephews. And at times they're like fairly vociferous in their views, but at times they're more comfortable WhatsApping and possibly responding in monosyllables. Even at the
Yeah.
workplace, yeah, so even at the workplace, possibly we've
Yeah.
found something like this quite often that, they prefer online meetings, they prefer, texting and mailing rather than having like a real conversation.
So this
So,
hardly
yeah, go
seems
ahead.
like an exaggeration to me. I
Hmm.
mean, I've seen things like this sort of happening. You spoke about this sort of fluid existence, real and
Right.
virtual kind of blending in. Sudeep, what has been your observation in this context of Gen Z, which views the world a little differently than the prior generations? Perhaps because they were born social media natives.
Yeah, thanks, Ashwini. Thanks, Geeta. Yeah, fundamentally, when we look at any generational theory,
Mm.
the Gen Z, their existence is very multidimensional, and which
Mm.
is driven a lot by their offline and online experience. Typically, any generation
Correct.
is in generation theory is defined by the group of people from the same time who were born at the same time, 60s or
Mm.
70s or 80s or whatever.
Mm.
And at the same time, it's also the social identity which is molded through common experiences. So, for example, the baby boomers came up to the world, okay, or
Mm.
the generation before that, or in India,
Mm.
you had the generation which was born and brought up during the emergency, okay, or,
Mm.
or
Mm.
which were young during the emergency and got a lot of values from there.
Mm.
Interestingly, what's happening for the Gen Z is
Mhm.
this experience part that we talk about that's getting collapsed because the experiences are both physical and the
Mhm.
experiences are vicarious through digital. Okay.
Absolutely.
So they have lived in a World War II through the movies. They are living
Mm.
now. They have multiple personalities online for various occasions. So hence I call them, the multiverse generation. Okay.
Mhm.
And largely with this generation lives in multiple touch points, occasion points. I'll give you some examples. Okay,
Mm.
for example, in fashion, normally, I mean, even a decade back, when we were planning, when we were doing planogramming for fashion, there'll be
Mhm.
a cyclicality. Okay, you will have bell bottoms, then you will have drain pipes, then we have
Mm.
baggy, then you'll have
Mm.
etc. etc. Today, because they have multiple locations, okay, in which they're operating, something for online, something for offline, something for the cocktail, something for the dinner, something for the Instagram, something. So all they need all of them at any point of time. Now, for a merchandiser, it's havoc. The solution, therefore, is any store today will have few collections in the store and will have therefore a huge omni experience or a dark warehouse, etc., to cater to the demand. Okay. Um, Also this generation again, I mean, like I said again, going back to they operate in multiverse. Okay, so you will find that for the same category they will exhibit very polar behaviors. Okay, they will say, for example, that sustainability matters, etc., but will all of and there are people, okay, this generation who for a given category really go the whole hog, become vegan, etc., organic, but at the same time I've seen them for same category or different categories do the complete reverse, go for fast fashion or go for unsustainable products and services. So it's a generation which is also living in multiple worlds. They have multiple needs and therefore will take to category. So category planners will have to be very careful because you will suddenly see the switch happening. Okay, this generation will do both. um, Best example is, this generation, because of their digital, they collapse the mundane. So grocery basket, for example, if you go to their homes, okay, and when you see them ordering stuff, you will see that in fact they have influenced the home purchase pattern so much that the grocery basket has completely collapsed. The month stocking has completely gone. Okay. In fact, it's a generation, if at all, the unifier for this generation, the huge unifier of this generation is the identity. Because the identity matters a lot, and the gentrification is a very good way of the identity unifier. Which part of the so somebody from Bandra will relate a lot more to say somebody from central Bangalore will relate a lot to somebody in United States because they belong to the same gentry, possibly studied in an IB school, have the similar kind of curriculum, okay, have the similar kind of fashion icons, follow similar kind of sports. So I'm saying gentrification is a larger identity, and again I see it in fashion retail and financial products. For example, what works in, I'm giving the example of Bombay because I am from Bombay. What works in South Bombay, Sobo, will not work in Andheri, will not work in Bandra, will not work in say Vashi and Thane. So the planogramming is very different because the gentry from that particular part is very, very different.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Ashwini, you
So
were saying
very
something?
interesting. Yeah, yeah. So I was just saying, completely agree with what Sudeep is saying that they have this, multifaceted, multiverse sort of existence. And what we tried to do was we tried to understand what is the underlying motivation behind that, right? And what we found is that this generation is not scared of failure, but what they're scared of is anonymity, right? So they want this need for continued relevance is something which is very high for this segment. And that's the reason why they look at social media as a way to curate an identity for themselves to meet their goals at any point in time. And we know that these goals could be short term, right? I mean, it's not as if like uh, that identity is going to remain forever, but that identity can have multiple facets and can evolve over a period of time. And there are just some examples that we notice. So, one is, of course, that there is a virtual identity and there is a real me or the real identity which is there. They are very comfortable with contradictions. So, they don't abide by stereotypes. So, a tech geek could also be a fashionista, which, few years back would have been like a contradiction and something that you would not think would happen. They are experimenting with side gigs. And while they may have like a stable job, but at the same time, they're trying out different things to see what works because, nothing is permanent for them. And of course, the definition of relationship is a little different because they look at situationships, what works for a certain kind of a situation. So definitely, concepts such as multiplicity, fluidity, plurality is something which is, what they live by. But while this is like a point of difference, what we've also seen is that, their basic motivations in terms of dreams and aspirations remain around money, they remain around success, and they remain around fame. So money is important to them. Like I think you also, sort of hinted at earlier.
Mm. Yeah. Sudhi, from the your exposure to world of finance, what have you picked up?
So, like Ashwini said, bang on. I mean, money is important to anybody, but I mean, the one thing about Gen Z is, at any point of time,
Mm,
they're very happy, but like your first
mm,
slide said, they're in a constant stage of stress and financial crisis because see, this is a generation which is extremely high on consumption. It's a consumerist generation. There are no two
Yeah.
ways
mm,
about it. The best way to understand a Gen Z is go to the cinema hall when the movie starts. You see them. Popcorn in one hand, the burger in the other, consuming the movie, consuming the fast food, consuming everything at any point of time, and therefore money is very important. And
mm,
in the earlier generation, we'll say, hey, you know what, you have to, money begets money. The interesting over here is the entry to money, and we've seen that in the capital work and all the other work that we do. The entry to
mm,
money often is not through traditional channels of money, but
mm,
through technology. For
mm,
example, okay, their benchmark of a good financial app is a fashion app, a gamified app, because they,
mm,
they want convenience, okay? And often, therefore, what happens is this is generation which is both, you'll get to see both sides. They are very tech savvy, but they need not be very financial savvy. The
mm,
expectations, therefore, what money can do. I mean, this is a generation where there's a huge scope of financial literacy. Huge, huge.
mm,
I mean, some of
mm,
them haven't even stepped into banks. Okay. Yet are they doing very complex transactions on their apps, okay? And I'm not just talking about the urban metros, okay? I've seen
mhm,
that in Banaras, huge proliferation of crypto, for example, in this generation, okay? And sometimes wrong understanding. So, for example, very good in the app part of it, doesn't know
mm.
what mutual fund that gives you, okay? So
Okay.
huge scope of, I mean, you see that spectrum, okay? So and therefore they're often, misled, okay?
Mm,
Um, so understanding money through technology, increasingly technical. Some of them don't, most of them, a lot of them don't carry wallets, okay?
mm,
Or
mm,
the wallets are all in the real estate of their mobile phone. So money through technology, but at the same time, don't know what you can do with the money, okay? How to
mhm,
transact. So you see those bipolar things at any point of time. So huge scope of financial literacy also, which
mm.
also means from a product design, from a experience, from a servicing, it's a different ballgame altogether. The way direct channels would work earlier for mutual fund, insurance, etc., won't work today anymore.
Mm. So definitely a generation for whom technology is a part of their reality. They've learned to perceive the world through technology. Of course, they are young, so there is a still a great distance to be traveled in terms of understanding finance and a whole lot of other elements that come with life maturity and so on. So
High on
very,
consumption, high on
hmm,
technology, low on
yeah,
patience.
low, low
Actually,
on
it's very
patience.
difficult
Yeah,
sometimes for example, when they're onboarding a product or service, you have to make them go through the fine tune because the dynamics of money wouldn't change.
yeah.
And that's a that's where the challenge is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think Ashwini also touched upon this. I mean, both of you spoke about this multiplicity of
Yeah.
identity or a complex pluralistic kind of an identity, but also at some levels it's creating stress. The kind of focus they have on mental well-being, and the fact you spoke about it, the stress, loneliness, and so on. So very, very fascinating generation.
Yeah.
But let's now switch gears a little bit and let's talk about our generation, right? And for some reason, increasingly, I feel nobody is talking to us much anymore, right? The brands, the marketing communication, not directed so much at people like you and me, and surely maybe not the entire Gen X. Surely we are worth addressing some of those communications at. What do you make
Yeah.
of it?
So again, absolutely bang on, Geeta. So, Gen X, when we speak to them, they tell us that we are the forgotten generation. We are the sandwich generation because, everybody is targeting the Gen Z or the millennials, or if at all, then even the boomers for the and the seniors for that matter. But nobody is really, talking to us. And even when they depict us, they show us in this, really sad state of mind, somebody who's unaware of everything and, is dependent on other people. So, and people are not able to fathom that there is a generation in between, right? And but interestingly, what we found is, as opposed to the Gen Z, who are these stressed, lonely, sort of generation, this generation, Gen X, they're well prepared, they're
Mhm.
optimistic, they're enthusiastic, they're waiting to live their life, but unfortunately, marketers are not really talking to them. And also, I mean, one of the reasons for that, about why they are actually embracing life, is because they have the financial wherewithal, right?
Mhm.
Now, look at them, from they've always been brought up to have a prudent and a saving sort of a mindset. As kids, we were
Mm.
told that, you put some aside, money aside for a rainy day,
Mm.
and, spend only part of, what you're earning, which is very
Yeah.
different from how Gen Z actually lives their life. So
Yeah.
they continue to save money, they continue to invest for the future. However, what is interesting is that they don't really know what to do with that money, because
Mm.
possibly a lot of their, large financial needs have been taken care of, whether it's buying a home, whether it's, the kids' education, whether it's having a car. And now they have the money, but and they want to spend, but they don't know what to really spend it on. So there is a little bit of a, dichotomy over here, which marketers definitely, need to look at very,
Yeah.
very closely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of untapped purchasing power for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Especially if we talk about not like the mass of the Gen X, but maybe the more affluent end. And with a population like India, any section is a fairly large base. So, in fact, from the tax returns kind of data, we do know, interestingly, that, or maybe understandably, that only 10% of the personal income tax collection actually comes from the youth, 35 and below. So surely a huge amount of Gen X sitting out there with a lot of
Mm.
purchasing power, with high amounts of disposable income, and not really being addressed in a meaningful way by marketers. And Sudeep, I remember when we were talking about generations, you had mentioned your observation on, how we can't treat the entire generation as a uniform, homogeneous cohort. And you spoke of gender differences.
Mm.
Uh, you want to touch upon that?
Yeah, basically, this is my gut. I mean, and I've observed that this is a generation which is in between two generations, and like, the Greek god Janus looking behind and looking back. This is a generation where I see an interesting development at this stage. There's a bit of a role reversal that happens, at least in the urban, and that too in the urban salaried households. Okay, what happens is the man no longer is, when you touch 45 to 50, your
Mm.
children have moved out or will be moving out, or you're no longer the provider alone. Okay, so suddenly
Mm.
you don't know what to do, because your life has been very linear, providing kind of a life, 9 to 5 job, come back, etc., etc. And suddenly you find empty. I mean, you find the nest empty, and the
Mm.
man definitely goes into a kind of a back foot. Physiologically also, this is the
Mm.
time when, both the genders are changing. You see the man, in a kind of, sometimes in a kind of reassurance of the relevance. So brands therefore need to do a lot more in terms of, okay, making sure that he is relevant. Okay, there's a bit of inferiority complex which sets in. Okay, body sometimes may not react. Okay, and I've seen that across various categories. Okay, whenever we have worked lifestyle categories, other kind of categories. So women is in a very interesting space, because suddenly the responsibility is gone, and this is for her to the time to, for liberation, transformation. In an earlier avatar, when I used to manage hair color as a category, the first streaks of hair color from the first kitty parties, the WhatsApp groups, trying to become something in the close vicinity, which could be the society or the locality, experimenting with different things. having some money for to spend, and to splurge on, no longer the regular responsibilities. The women actually take off at this stage. So here, a lot of the brands can talk about, liberation and transformation. Some of the lifestyle categories do really well over here. So I think, while there is, I mean, there's no data, but in my mind, having looked at this, I mean, urban salaried India in this age brand, I think that there is a wee bit, okay, gender difference or a role reversal that starts happening at this age. Especially, it also depends on how smooth the retirement process is, okay, whether you have enough funds or not and all of that. Um, Typically, those things matter, but yeah, we get to see that in a lot of financial categories also. This role reversal starts happening.
So
And
again, a very relevant point, Geeta, right?
mm,
Because I think we've also seen something like this, play out, and you're completely bang on when you say that the needs of women could be different from the needs of men, and hence there is a reason to look at genders a little bit separately. But beyond that, we also felt that, brands need to relook at the way they're looking at age and aging per se, because there are two distinct needs which play out for this segment. One is the need to be ageless, right? So it is about looking good, it's about looking young, it's feeling young, and it's being treated as young because, often they get clubbed along with the boomers and the seniors who are there, but they're not really there. And the second is about having age friendly or age appropriate sort of products. Because, yes, when you are in your 40s, your body is undergoing a lot of changes and it is entering into a different phase. And there need to be, products which understand the needs of people at, of that particular age group. So, of course, there are certain possibly, I mean, immediately I can think of a few categories, which is your health and wellness, which fits in beautifully over here. There could be an ageless thread over here. And it could also be about, having age appropriate or age friendly sort of products. But beyond that, Sudeep, what would you say? Which are the other categories where you feel that, this could play out really well?
So a little bit of everything, a little bit of care, Ashwini, a little bit of cure, a little bit of protection,
Okay.
a little bit of lifestyle. This is the time, like health and wellness. First of all, I think there's a huge scope. This is the time when you catch them. Actually, a lot of the salary, their medical insurances will go off if the corporate insurances are there. Okay, so
Yeah.
the ticket, the small, medium ticket or large ticket health insurance products can really come in. Okay, like the care kind of products. Okay, this is also the phase where, if some of them want to set up, seniors are living, okay, that comes in, that one house, or you want to have a stay in a community in future, you book for that, all of that. Advisory
Yeah.
services, interestingly, I mean, we see that in Atula Capital, a lot of the advisory services are missing. People, I mean, only 2 to 3% still have a tax advisor or a consultant. So huge amount of stuff in the health and wellness space, both products and services. Travel happens. This is the time when both of them will say, hey, you know what, I will travel, or I mean, increasingly a lot of women or men, okay, they will have their own friends and they'll travel, they do their solo
Yeah.
travels or travel with
So,
community. Home and home improvement. Home improvement is very big. Now you have little money to splurge, maybe the garden, maybe the terrace, small shack, maybe this or your second home, like I said. Senior age and living. I mean, if any one of you travel to Coimbatore, any of these places, that's become very, very critical. Senior age itself is a very big bracket. First part of senior age, 60s to 70, is lifestyle, where you want a swimming pool, you have like-minded friends, movies. The latter part is where you want to be taken care of. It's more the cure. So those are coming in. Cars, the second car comes in, or maybe the third car comes in, or for the men, the motorcycle comes in. Okay, first hand or second hand, auto ancillaries, things which you could splurge on. Uh, Jewelry and other lifestyle for a lot of, I mean, because we are in jewelry, I get to see that often. Either you're buying for yourself the locker jewelry as well as the drawer jewelry. If it's the locker jewelry, it's for your kids, their marriage. It's for if it's the drawer jewelry for the kitty parties, the high-end items which ideally you earlier couldn't afford. I still remember the old DTC ad. Where the elderly
the
man giving a
diamond.
diamond to
Yeah.
his wife. And education for children. This is the time because some of them suddenly will see. I mean, doing well in their corporate. They can see the last 10 years. They want to make that fund, education fund for them. And nowadays, increasingly, self-education is also coming in. Language is something I want to learn as a skill and all of that.
Yeah.
So these are some of the things that broadly one can get to see. Of course, the usual culprits, usual categories of personal care, high-end personal care and high-end fashion is any which way. But these are some of the categories which really have been
Yeah,
interesting.
and with this huge sort of opportunity and obviously distinct needs that different sectors can address, and like I said before, maybe not at a Gen Pop level, but certainly at the affluent end of Gen X.
Yeah.
So a very strong case I think both of you have made for our generation, and I thank you for that. That marketers, brands, please pay some attention to us. We are still around, and we are not done yet. So on that note, I think let's just. We saw today two generations, two contrasting generation, filial generations, you could say. The new generation, Gen Z, which is coming into the spotlight of the consumer world, and everybody is curious, and everybody wants to figure them out, and everybody wants to crack the code. And we've shared some of our sort of thoughts around that, some hacks for you, so to say. And the other generation, which for some strange reason nobody is actually paying attention to, and it's time maybe we should devote some degree of sort of spotlight to the Gen X also. So on those notes, I think let's switch now to some question and answers, and I see quite a few questions here. Uh, the first one I just want to take up here is there is a question here on, is this concept, I think this is to you, Sudeep, the multi-dimensional multiverse existence of Gen Z. Do you think it is just a function of age, that they will grow out of it, or is it like a generational characteristic?
I would assume it's a very interesting question, and I think it's like I said, they will they will carry on with it. Okay, that's not going to change anymore, because if you look at Michael Hartman or anybody's the generational theories, like I said, it's when you were born, and it's the experience which is the collective experience, the social identity which is through the collective experience that you have. Those experiences are going to be very vicarious today. A lot of our experiences are actual, and uh, they're lived through, okay, through digital and through online. And as that collapse happens, this multiplicity of multidimensional living in multiple generation time points, okay, that's increasingly going to happen. Okay, fragmentation of time and therefore fragmentation of experiences are going to happen. That's something I mean, therefore, for a marketer, I mean, for example, single piece communication of brands are no longer going to be relevant. You will have to have multiple communications for multiple touch points. Performance marketing will increasingly become more and more important. Those things are going to happen.
Yeah. And somewhere while you were speaking, I was also wondering, is this premium on physical world just our generational trait? Is it a tell for us and not such a big deal for the newer generations, perhaps, who don't necessarily think virtual is any less, perhaps? On that note, a question, this I think, let me address it to you, Ashwini. Um, so there is this concept you spoke about, age sensitive and ageless. So do you also have an understanding of which of these themes or platforms are more dominant in Gen X, and which sector should maybe focus on which theme? Do you have any understanding on that?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I don't think there is any, real data that we have to suggest which is a bigger, need which is there. But of course, if you look at ageless, then, you look at it in a slightly more positive light because it's telling people that, you're still young And that is a universal sort of a need which is there, that everybody wants to come across as, young. They want to look beautiful. They want to feel young. They want to be able to do the things which they were doing earlier. So that is like a, reasonably big need. But at the same time, like I said, that people are aware and that they're aging. So, and hence the need for specific products which which address those health issues is also there. So look at, supplements. Now, a generic sort of a supplement will not work for somebody who's in their mid 40s or early 50s for that matter. You would require something which is, meant for that age. So, possibly, the same, category could address both these needs in a slightly different sort of a manner. But we don't really have data to say which is a bigger, sort of a need. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a brief waiting to happen right there.
Yeah.
So there are two questions. Let me just target those at you, Sudeep, both on the financial aspect that you spoke about. So there is one question: do you feel because of the tech interface, Gen Z doesn't have a real understanding of finance? So that's the first question. And then there is another question, which is there's a comment that it's very interesting to see that there are very few financial products targeted at Gen X. So one question about Gen Z, the other one is Gen X. Currently, they're seen as liabilities. How can this be addressed? So the first question is the world of finance perceived through tech? Does it, in a way, blunt their understanding of it? And for Gen Z and for Gen X, how can their specific financial needs be targeted better?
I'll take the second one. Yeah, I agree. The Gen X is underserved. Okay, especially in a country like India, it's a potential. It's underserved. Okay, partly it's also regulatory because in a financial services market which is extremely regulatory, there are a lot of regulations which come in where the risk assessment and all of those things happen. It's to do with that, okay, because the need is there for that particular segment of Gen X. But big certain products and services can't just be unlike say international markets. Okay, it's a lot to do with the regulation and the risk assessment and the civil scores and all of that, which is why a lot of the tailored customized products earlier couldn't be done. Increasingly, the market is changing. You have high-end insurances, high-end mutual funds, bespoke. A lot of bespoke products are coming in. A lot of cross-sell, upsell products are coming in. Okay, increasingly now. Okay, but like I said, it's a lot to do also with regulation. But that part of the market is underserved. For the first question on Gen Z, um, uh, every generation learns money the hard way. Okay, every generation. Um, I know we learned when mutual funds came in, we learned through the hard. Every generation learns money. This generation, I would like to put it like this: it's not that they know more or know less. Possibly they know maybe more. Okay, they are learning it through tech, and that's something you have to understand. Therefore, the one big point I want to make is earlier a product. Then you got a mutual fund product, you got an insurance product, or you got any product. Okay, auto insurance product. Okay, the product will do the talking. That won't happen anymore. The experience will, the online offline interface will matter a lot. Your experience will matter a lot. Your continuity of touch points. Maybe I will see the product, I'll consider it online, I'll go to offline for checking it on the online offline retail. Okay, my direct sales agent. Okay, that matters a lot. I think those things will equally matter a lot. Every generation learns it. This generation will learn it through technology, and the one who can do it better. I mean, if I look at the plethora of apps today from the banks, 2 years back, 3 years back, some of the banking apps were not up there. Today, they're already up there. So everybody's learning the game. Everybody's inventing. This generation will learn money through technology.
So there's a question on apps, Sudeep.
Through influencers also. Influencers play a very critical role, which is why the recent regulation by SEBI and all of that.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying something.
No, I was just saying, while you were speaking about apps, I saw a question on apps, and it's an interesting question with multiple apps competing for our attention on an ongoing basis, basically share of time. What may be a way forward in making finance more friendly and approachable for Gen X as well as Gen Z, could there be a common ground that caters to both these groups? So, addressing both generation through the same app, how do you serve experiences relevant for two different generations?
I think
It's a tough
ultimately
one.
the fight of any app will be on this real estate. Okay.
Yeah.
How much can you load on this real estate? And yeah, I mean, any financial services company will ultimately have one. There's a lot of backend and there's one app and all of that. However, the experience, the products, the touch points could be completely different. For the Gen Z, you may actually have to have people who will support you offline. For the Gen X, maybe because of their understanding of those particular products or the instrument and what it does, you need not. So everything can be actually done digital. I've seen the other way around also, actually. Doesn't always mean Gen Z, everything will happen digitally, all touch points. Redemptions are very important. When the product, so for you're taking insurance and when you're claiming, okay, your experience at that point of time, how is it? Okay, for example. Those things matter. So yeah, I mean, the app at the front face will be one, but the back end and the experience and the product could be completely different.
So lots of questions. There is also a bunch of questions around, okay, why aren't you focusing on Gen Y, millennials, or boomers? It just happened to be, two topics, two generations that we picked in this case was Gen Z and Gen X. Gen X makes a case because, like Ashwini said, it's a forgotten generation. Gen Z, everybody is talking about it. By no means have we forgotten millennials. Millennials are square in the spotlight. There's a interesting question here. I'm conscious of time, so I'll probably close with this question. It's an interesting one. I don't know if you guys have an answer to this. Do you have an understanding on generation and adoption of pets? What has changed? Lots more questions. I just picked this one up because it looked very interesting.
So I think that loneliness has something to do with it, right? Because, and we've seen the connection with pets is a lot more natural and easier for the Gen Z as opposed to connecting with people. And, a lot of the issues around stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom are maybe getting addressed uh, through a pet. So, I mean, that's just a very, top of the mind sort of feel. Yeah.
Yeah, interestingly, when I was discussing this topic of generations with some of our colleagues in Korea, they spoke of a new phenomena there, which they call dinkwards, which is double income, no kids with a dog.
Yeah.
So a pet as a child substitute is something that
Interesting.
which is coming up elsewhere in the world. I don't know if we have good enough data to comment about that trend for India for now, but certainly the fact that raising kids are more expensive affairs now than ever before, and perhaps being a pet parent addresses many of those sort of instincts is driving pet adoption. So interesting question. And on that note, I think we had a very interesting, absorbing, fascinating discussion. Before I close, I want to thank you both. It was a wonderful discussion. And I want to remind everyone on the call, there's tons of content available on generations. This is a sort of a pillar theme for Ipsos. There is a report that you can scan and download, and a lot more content. Just reach out to the people that you know in Ipsos, reach out to any one of us, and we'll be happy to share more and address your questions to the best of our abilities. On that note, I want to thank you both, Ashwini, Sudip, and I want to thank this wonderful audience for joining us today for this interesting chat on generations. With that, we take your leave. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.